When I say small town mindset, the worry always was that you have access to less information. So when you do come to a city to work, do the people who who've actually grown up in cities, they obviously have more exposure than you would.
You also talk about small town mindset, and I was very curious when coined, I won't say you coined the term, but I've heard you talking about it a lot. Maybe you can walk me over that and what that's like. What's the small town mindset like?
So when I was growing up, obviously the internet. I mean, I don't even remember the internet till I was a little older. It shows that I'm older than when most people would be listening to this. But I think the learning for me was the fact that you had access to very few careers, right? I mean, everybody you knew was either trying to be a doctor, trying to be an engineer, maybe they were trying to be a lawyer, but or commerce, right? Those literally were the only options. You didn't know what else. And I always wanted to work in the media space. I think only reason why, because I thought it looked like it was a lot more fun than anything else. So when I say small town mindset, the worry always was that you have access to less information. So when you do come to a city to work, do the people who've actually grown up in cities, they obviously have more exposure than you would. I thankfully had parents who gave me a lot of exposure from the time I was younger. They, we traveled. They were very open about me learning different things. So that thankfully helped me. But I would say there are pros and cons to this, right? If you've always been in a city, sometimes you don't understand how the wider part of the country functions. In general, right? I mean, how would someone who is sitting in coastal Andhra consume content versus how would somebody sitting in let's say rural Punjab consume content, right? So most times your idea of understanding consumers was the fact that it was just about perception, right? So you would go to caricature. So, that whole term about people say, are you South Indian? And I'm like, that's not like a thing, right? There's so many sides to it. So many states, so many regions. So in a similar way, I think that was the problem then. I don't think it exists as much now because I feel thanks to the internet, that has been made a lot more level. So because of that, we're now at a point where you can be exposed to so much more wherever you are. But the mindset is largely because of the I would say the wider society not being exposed to too many of these things. To give an example, when I became a producer in television, which was generally the person who was managing the entire thing and overseeing creative as well as logistics, one of the first questions I would get asked when I would go back home by someone I would meet would say, "Oh, you're a producer, which means are you putting money into the shows, right?"
That hasn't changed yet.
Yeah. So I had to constantly explain to them, right? Yeah. To explain to people what I do, even till now, sometimes, and I would say slightly older people, I think younger ones get it a lot easier, is still something. And I think that's really the gap, right? That small term mindset is that gap. But the positive, and I've always looked at it as a positive, that I know a lot more about what is beyond a Bombay or beyond a Delhi than most other people would if they were brought up in the city. So it's always a positive, and that's what I tell everybody. Don't ever feel like it's a negative that you weren't born in a metro. I mean, there's a positive there.
Right. So, and that's interesting that you talk about it, but I'd like to dig more deep into it. Do you think that affects your, self-esteem somewhere? Because maybe that might be like, how does that work out? And I'm sure if you could talk about how it affected you, and then how you took a step back and looked at it again. Because I'm sure there are many people from outside that are trying to enter the industry, right? And I'm sure that might help them.
It's simple, right? When each place has a certain culture, it means that you dress a certain way, you speak a certain way, you are used to certain kinds of conversations, your knowledge base is certain. When I first moved to Bangalore from Kakinada, I remember that I had a huge inferiority complex. I would always feel like the least cool person in the room. People had obviously seen and done a lot more things. The stuff which I thought was cool turned out to be not so cool. In hindsight, that was also true because I think I had a fluorescent yellow shirt for some reason which I don't understand yet, or checkered pants, and I think that was the first instance of me realizing I need to think about what I wear a lot more. And it's just stuff like that, right? And that always takes you onto a back foot. But at some point, you need to make that switch as an individual to kind of turn around and say, no, 1 second. everybody has different experiences. These are mine, and let me just try and take some positives out of it, right? So it's about switching your mindset. It took me years to do that. I would say that I spent a good 7 years in Bangalore, and I would say till the end of it, I still had some pieces of that. It was only when I kind of moved to Pune and started studying there is when I made a conscious decision that no, I will not allow that to be part of my personality anymore. That I will not work from a point of inferiority. I will work from the fact that I have experiences and they count. And that's when I kind of changed how I was. And sometimes you have to sit yourself down and kind of turn around and say, once again, there is nothing called inferior or superior, no matter where you're from. It's about how you project yourself and how you're honest with yourself. I mean, and I think that's the most important thing to do.